And that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks that he's not my dad. It's not my dad.
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an Ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. I hope everyone is considering coming to the Untangling Our Roots Summit for 2026. It will be held in Atlanta on March 19th through the 22nd. I already bought my tickets, and their website is untanglingourroots.org. So right now, this is the only conference you will find that is for adoptees, donor-conceived people, people with an NPE, that's me, genetic, raising parents, also including siblings and spouses and the professionals who support us. I have been to the last two conferences. And last time they had a significant other track, and I thought that was such a great addition. I even knew a couple birth fathers that attended, and we realized that this conference really needs to be for all the support people in our lives, not necessarily just the NPE or the adoptee. So if you have family members that want to come with you, or a spouse or a sibling, maybe a birth mother, birth father, this is the conference for us. So I'm planning on being in Atlanta for the conference. I'm really excited about it. There will be all my other podcaster friends, authors. Oh, they're also having a genealogist track on Saturday. Wow, really check out this schedule on their website. I just want to support this group, and I'm really looking forward to spending time with other NPEs. So I hope to see you there. Welcome to episode 233. And right off the bat, I wanted to say thank you to someone who's been working on my logo for the NPE Stories podcast. She was a volunteer. Her mom listens to the show. Thank you so much, Olivia. Olivia Maynard Hendricks has been working on the logo. She has an Instagram handle down below. I'd love to credit her. And I just really appreciate anyone that's volunteered their time to the podcast. Thank you again, Olivia. And today we're going to get into listening to an NPE story. And today I have on DJ. Hi, DJ.
Hi, Lily. How you doing?
I'm doing really good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
And where am I talking to you from? What part of the country are you from?
I am currently in Dallas, Texas.
So you have much different weather than me. I am in Minneapolis right now, so quite different.
Not quite the Arctic tundra.
No,
it is cold for Dallas, though. People are like, "Oh, it's so cold outside." It's like, well, it's cold, I guess, for Dallas. It's in the 40s. It's not really cold.
Oh, okay. No, I suppose that is for you, but no, not for us. That is a balmy day for us.
Yeah, it's not bad. We're going to get. It's this time of the year when, we start getting colder. Then, everybody freaks out. And hopefully this year we can avoid some ice storms. But yeah, it doesn't really get below freezing here. So I don't consider Dallas to be a cold place.
No. Oh gosh, I drove through Texas with my family during COVID, and you guys had just had this ice storm. It was terrible. Like nobody could drive in that. Well, granted, you don't have the proper materials to take care of your road in that condition, but it was quite an experience.
We're not built for snow and ice in Dallas.
No,
that's for sure.
Well, DJ, let's go ahead and find out more about your NPE story. And so normally I'd like to start with your your family of origin. So who was in your raising family, and then we can get an idea about what your childhood was like.
Well, I'm originally from Cleveland, and uh, I, I s- I grew up my entire life. I'm named after my father. That's why I'm DJ, because I'm a Don Jr. And we moved to Texas when I was about 3 years old for work opportunities for my dad, and I ended up being raised here. We went back and forth a couple times throughout the years, but mostly raised here by my mom and my dad. Mostly by my mom. My dad was a truck driver by trade, so being a over the road truck driver for half of the year or more half of the year, he was gone a lot. And then when he was home, we would do things that he wanted to do, like we go fishing or something. We'd spend time outdoors doing fishing, working on cars, things like that. And I didn't have a bad childhood. I wasn't affluent by any means. I was a latchkey, average, below average income family kid. Kind of make fun uh, on your own terms. We didn't have all the electronic devices and stuff anyway, so we were always being kicked outside. So weren't in our parents' hair. Get outside and play. I don't want you in the house. You're bugging me. Drinking from the water hose type kid. Yeah, I mean, not a lot to complain about. There were some ups and downs. I learned a lot about what was normal and not normal growing up, as far as like family dynamics, and you know uh, the word abuse was used differently in the 80s than it was in modern times, and you learn a lot about that as an adult, and you're like, oh wow, that I guess some of these things weren't normal per se. Although I have to say, in terms of stories I've heard and people that I've encountered in my life, I had a pretty fortunate childhood and not a lot of complaints there. Things could have been better. There always could have been more money. There could have been, less anger and things like that. But overall, it's not bad. And but the one thing about my childhood that kind of stood out to me is that there was always conjecture about whether or not I belonged to my dad. And, growing up being named after the man, I'm like, why are people always asking? Yeah, I kind of just took it for granted that it was a normal thing that people, oh, you look like the mailman's kid. It's the typical joke. You're the mailman's kid, or you're the milkman's kid. And they're like, we don't even have a milkman. What are you talking about? But my dad is a small man. He's like 5'4", 5'5". He was between 140 and 160 pounds his entire adult life. I am 6'3", about 375. So quite a stark contrast. I'm two of him. He wears a size 4.5 men's shoe. I wear a size 15. He's brown eyes, dark brown, almost black hair. I'm light brown, hazel eyes. Different complexions, different builds, different facial structure. So all the signs were there growing up. But you're in denial, and you always come up with excuses. Oh, well, I get my height and my size and some of my looks and my lighter hair from my mom's side, because my mom's she's half Mexican, half German. So the German side of her family are all very tall, lighter brown hair, dimples, the whole nine. And dimples are on both sides of the family. So there was always a justification for my appearance versus my father's appearance. But that was something that was always a conjecture, especially strangers come up. That's your kid? Is like, people literally asked if I was adopted. That there were several conversations I can remember growing up where people would start a conversation about whether I was adopted, and then start talking about our genealogy and our ethnic background and stuff, trying to figure out how I'm his kid. And again, I kind of just blew it off. It's like, okay, whatever. There's just adults being adults, right? But it turns out, I guess that wasn't a normal conversation by, societal standards. It wasn't until my adult life that I learned more to fill in those puzzle pieces. But, at the end of my childhood, around 18, my parents actually finally got divorced. I had gone away to college in Kilgore College in East Texas, and my mom came to visit me, and she was beaten up quite a bit, and that's when it came to me that I needed to do something to help her. And for lack of a better term, it's almost like she was seeking approval to get away. Like she was afraid to leave. And, conversations I had with both my parents after this incident were that they stayed together my entire childhood because of me. But, like an obligation to raise me as a family. And I literally just talked to my mother about this last night, and she had no idea I ever felt this way. And unfortunately, I didn't mean to, but unfortunately, it brought her to tears because then she felt overwhelming guilt. And I'm like, well, no, it's not about that. I'm letting you know what I'm processing, because I think it's only fair to let you know the weight of the words that I grew up with. And when I was 18, that was really heavy for me to absorb. And I didn't quite understand the feelings that I was having surrounding these words. Being an 18-year-old kid and knowing that, coming to the realization, that the arguing and the fighting and the physical altercations and, the beatings that I had and stuff, they weren't normal discipline. They weren't normal everyday life. They weren't normal arguments that parents have. That wasn't normal behavior. Whether it happened a lot during that time period is another story. But it wasn't normal, and it wasn't how people should ideally treat each other. And of course, we know more about that now, and we know more than ever, and we learn more every year that, hey, that's not healthy mentally, physically, in any way, shape, form, or fashion to have those abusive relationships. And essentially, I felt like I was blamed for that. That we stayed together for you. It was best for you that we maintain a marriage. Like, yeah, but it was a very bad marriage. Lots of expletives in front of that word marriage to describe it, but none of them are good. And then me just becoming an adult myself, having to deal with the weight of those words, like, oh, you tortured each other and myself for me. How is that right? And that's something I've heard before in other people's stories. And actually that's one of the reasons, just situations like that are one of the reasons why I reached out to you to begin with, because I felt alone in these feelings, and it's so gratifying and cathartic to know that there's other people that can relate to even just a little bit of what you're going through. Even though that's the smallest part of this story for me, at least, but that's still that's a facet of the story that most of my friends can't relate to most of that. They can't relate to how that feels. And a lot of people I encountered don't relate to that, and they don't understand. They just tell you, oh, well, you just need to forgive and forget. You need to move on. So sometimes it's just not that easy. Sometimes you have to figure out the process of forgiving. And you can't forget because you go to sleep, and when you go to sleep, you can still hear those things in the back of your mind. They don't just go away. It has to be processed. And learning that there's people out there that have gone through not only the NPE part of the story, but then similar stories of familial abuse is so cathartic and so helpful. And thank you to this community and to you, Lily, for having such a impactful podcast to allow, and allowing people to share their stories, because it really does help everybody that puts ears on it. We actually talked about, I had an NPE meetup this weekend, and we talked about your podcast amongst others. And there's a couple people on there that are on the waiting list and can't wait to get on and share their very impactful stories too. But all this stuff, just starting with the childhood trauma, it's just so helpful to hear stories. And that's part of the big reason I wanted to share mine, even though, mine's, it's different and maybe not as impactful as other stories, and to some people, maybe it'll be more impactful. I don't know, but I just want to share it because it's not just about me processing, because it is cathartic to share, but it's also about helping others process. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, completely. It does.
So yeah, the parents get divorced at 18, and because there are legal ramifications for the actions of my father, and there's consequences for that. One of his friends convinced him that I was working with the district attorney's office to have him thrown in prison, and he ran. Like, I left college to come home and help mom get out of the situation, and also to, kind of mediate between mom and dad and try to play the middle guy, which I should have never been in that position. I look back on it and I'm like, why did I try to do that? Why did I get in the middle? It just, I shouldn't have. But, you're trying to keep some semblance of family, and I was trying not to lose everything because I knew mom was going to go away in a shelter, and I wasn't even allowed to talk to her for a year. And was very close to both of my parents. I'm very close to my mother. And so the situation itself broke my heart and angered me. There was so much that was happening. And then my dad allowed one of his friends to lie to him and convince him that I was trying to put him away. When really my goal was, hey, I need a place to live. Let's continue a household of some sort. You and I get a place. He was an on the road trucker anyway. He was going to be gone most of the time. I just wanted to go back to school, but I needed a place to call home. I needed an address. I needed a place to lay my head at night. And one day, we went and we were supposed to go look at an apartment on a Friday. I show up at the apartment building and he was not there, hadn't been there. He didn't even make the appointment with the office. They didn't know who I was or why I was there. And, I tried to call him. I couldn't get a hold of him, and I go looking for him, and he was gone. He actually took my car that I had worked all summer before college to buy. It was a 71 Ford Ranchero Grand Squire. Cool car, kind of like an El Camino, but the Ford version. And I worked all summer really hard to buy that car. And he packed it up with his stuff and he took off, and didn't see him for like 7 years.
Oh, wow.
He ran from everything, including me, because he just believed the lies of other people, and he was afraid. I get it. He was very fearful. I wouldn't want to face significant jail time either, but, at least be a man and stand up for to the consequences of your actions. Take responsibility. It doesn't, turns out he didn't have to have jail time. He would have probably just been on community supervision. Because I was talking to DA, but I was talking to them about not putting him in jail because, I was in school and I needed him for that. But I didn't hear from him for 7, almost 8 years. By the time I caught up with him again, I'd already had 2 beautiful little girls. And so he met them for the first time as, 6 and 7-year-olds. So he missed out on a lot by running. And then fast forward, I first took a DNA test for like, I'd actually taken DNA tests before, for like court purposes. Like when I was, my children's mother and I the cycle continued with me as far as like not getting along with a spouse. I was not abusive, physically abusive or any of that stuff, but, we didn't get along. We chose not to stay together. So my daughters grew up in a divided household as well. And so part of that is going to child support and going to family court, and you do a DNA test and everything. So the stigma of I don't want the government to have my DNA was way out the door for me because they already had it. That's always a lot of people's excuses. I don't want the government to have my DNA. I don't know what they're going to do with it. Well, they're not going to clone you. If they were, they would have already done it. So they could probably get it from your cell phone these days. So I think it was around 2014 I actually did Ancestry DNA, because I've always been interested in family history and knowing where I'm from. A lot of my dad's side of the family isn't really documented, and he's always passed down the story that he was part Native American. But a lot of Caucasians say that.
Yes.
Whether they are or not. Everybody wants to have some cool familial history, and I get it. I wanted to know the facts though, so I did Ancestry DNA. Turns out at the time they didn't separate paternal and maternal DNA. As far as your background, they would just tell you what you were made of. And when I did my first Ancestry DNA, got the results back, it did tell me that I had Native American blood in me. But it turns out later on, after they could, they started dividing it by paternal and maternal, it was all my mother's side because of the Mexican blood. Because if you have Mexican heritage, a lot of times that includes Native American heritage for obvious reasons. You know, you have the European blood from the Spaniards coming over and conquering Mexico and Central America. But what did they conquer? They conquered the natives that live there. So that's where my Native American blood comes from my Mexican heritage. Nothing on my paternal side. Paternal side said Appalachian and Irish, English, blah, 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 which it aligned with what I knew about my father. My dad is from Logan, West Virginia, smack in the middle of Appalachia. And no alarm bells came up. One thing that was odd when I first did the test is that, you know, they start giving you matches, and some of my cousins on the Hinojosa side of the family would pop up, and, you know, some other extended family would pop up from, you know, the German side and things like that. But I never saw the surname Pridemore, which is my last name. I never saw the surname Pridemore on my hits. There were no Pridemores. I didn't really think too much of it either because, again, Appalachia. I'm like, oh, most of the Pridemore family that I'm aware of, you know, they're not really into technology. They live up in the holler in West Virginia. They live their lives, and they don't trust a lot of government. They don't trust a lot of things like DNA tests and stuff like that. It's hard for them to, you know, get caught up in that. And so it wasn't surprising to me that there weren't any Pridemores because I just assumed that none of them had really tested, just out of, you know, they just don't know enough about it, and it's not something they're into. They have their family history written down in their family Bible and stuff. So they, in their eyes, they don't need it. So that really didn't, you know, surprise me. It wasn't until later on, after my dad's sister, my aunt, had passed away, that the topic really came up again. And I'd asked my dad to take a DNA test for two reasons. A, I wanted to see if maybe he did have some Native American heritage, because if he does and he had enough, you know, A, it's cool to know where you come from. And that's always been my motivation. It's like, I want to know. I always kind of had a hard time feeling like I fit in with my family, feeling like I fit in really anywhere. You know, there was always like these empty holes inside of me that I just couldn't explain. I didn't have a real sense of belonging. And that's kind of where my curiosity of genealogy and ancestry kind of happened. And my mom always supported that. And she gave me a lot of information about her family. And it was cool to feel a connection there. But I didn't have anything paternally. I didn't know where my surname came from. I didn't know where I was from or who I was. And that goes back into my childhood. I just never really felt that, you know, how I assume other people felt whenever they grow up knowing who their great grandfather was, or knowing that, you know, their great 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 grandfather fought in the Civil War and this, that, and the other. You know, the people that had the stories passed down. Because I was so disconnected from my extended family, having moved to Texas at 3 years old, I didn't grow up with those stories, except for the big get-togethers. We'd get around, and I would get little snippets here and there, and that was fun. But never from my father's side. I only went to West Virginia a couple of times growing up, and I would only be around my dad's family a few times, mostly one of my uncles, my Uncle Doug. And he didn't like to talk about the way that he was raised or growing up or family history, because they weren't great memories. They grew up hard, and, you know, they lived a lot off the land. If they didn't hunt it, grow it, or otherwise, a lot of times they didn't eat. They didn't go to the store. You know, they had cow for milk, chickens for eggs, and for meat, and they would go hunting, and they lived, even though they were all 20th century, they very much lived off the land. They would buy grain and stuff and flour, things like that from the store, but they bought very little from the store. My grandmother, my dad's mother, still made all of her dresses out of old flour sacks. You know, that whole tradition. They grew up very modestly, almost Amish, except they weren't. They were Pentecostals, but they embraced technology. They had cars and stuff like that and hot rods, and they loved to hot rod around and play Dukes of Hazzard in the hills of Logan County, West Virginia, but they grew up hard, so none of them really passed down any story. There were stories here and there, but they didn't really share a lot. So I was always hunting and searching and trying to find that belonging. Let's see, this is now 2026, so this would be right around it was right after the pandemic started. I went and I took my daughter with me, and we went to my dad when he took off for 7 years. He actually took off to Missouri. He was pretty close. I just didn't know that he had gone there, but that's where he still lives today. So I looked him up after that 7 years, and we rekindled our relationship, and we had some sit downs and some discussions about that 7 year gap and what led to that, and kind of reconciled. And he was a lot different. He's a lot different man today than he was when I was growing up, and I'll give him credit for that. And his current wife has done a lot to help him grow as a man and as a human. He found a new religious relationship and was able to reconcile a lot of his own personal demons. So that was good for him. I'm happy for him. And he's got a wonderful partner in life that has helped guide him to that place that he is now. So anyways, having rekindled that relationship, I do visit him from time to time. I'll drive up there and hang out with him, go for a week or a weekend. And when the pandemic came, we went up for a visit, and we were sitting around talking. It was after my aunt had passed, and we were talking about stuff, and the topic came up that they found some of my grandfather's old Army records and stuff, and they claimed a pretty substantial claim about his service record that I won't get into specifics about, because I don't want to embarrass anybody or bring any negative light upon anything like that. But there was something that came up, and I'm sort of a history buff, and I've studied World War II a lot and met a lot of World War II veterans and gone to a lot of World War II world sites. I've been to Belgium, I've been to France, I've been to Amsterdam and things like that, and seen a lot of the Battle of Bulge sites. I've been to Normandy and seen a lot of the D-Day invasion sites and things like that. And I've read a lot of those books. I've read a lot about the Pacific Theater, and my maternal grandfather served in the Navy, and he served during World War II and during Korea. So he spent a lot of time in the Pacific. I've talked to him about it, read his stories, things like. So I've done a lot of reading on the topics, and I'm moderately educated on World War II. And the claim that she came up with about my grandfather, while it did fit the narrative of the Pacific War, it wasn't factual in how she presented the claims that she did for him. So I wanted to verify or get that story put to bed. But I took the positive road to convince my dad to take DNA. Hey, let's do DNA. Let's prove this Native American heritage. And then we can validate all these records and this, that, and the other. And, bring some really positive light to grandfather. So he agreed under that kind of, under that situation to do the DNA. He finally agreed to do the DNA. I left the fact that there was a young man that's a few years younger than myself, about 7 years younger than myself, that had claimed to be his son. That's one of the reasons he didn't want to do DNA, because he was worried that maybe that would come to light. But, as somebody that ever since I was a child, that it was a tryst that my dad had, and it resulted in a child, which I left that out of the story earlier, but it resulted in a child. And it was always a point of contention for my mom and dad. My dad always denied it, even though we lived with this woman and her infant child, for a few years when I was a child, when I was like 6 or 7 years old. And weird situation. And it was only for about 6 months and we got out of there. It was too tumultuous, but he didn't want to deal with that. So I think that's why he didn't want to do DNA, but that was now at the back of his mind. And we were talking about his father and, military service records and things like that. So he agreed, and we do the swab. I order him a kit. We do the swab and send it off. And he's not very technologically savvy. He can build anything without a plan. You give him some nails and some scrap wood, and He'll make birdhouses all day. He'll make a chicken coop. I mean, he could build a barn if he had enough materials. And with just, he's just a handy guy. And I think that's where I get it from. I'm a pretty handy guy. Things just kind of make sense. But I grew up in that, that's one of the gifts that he gave me growing up is that kind of ability to just make things work. Either way, I get him the test. He's not good with computers, so he just lets me take control of his account. So I set up an account for him, give him a username, password, everything. But he told me just to hold on to it. He didn't really want to deal with it. Just we'll sit down and talk about it when it's done. I'm like, okay, cool, that's fine. So we send it off, and honestly, I forgot about it because we go on with our visit, and I come back to Texas. And it's the middle of the pandemic, and there's all kinds of stuff to worry about and deal with during the pandemic. I work in radio. I ended up being furloughed during the pandemic from the company I was working for. So I was sitting at home, making sure I'm doing different things to try to keep my skills up and stay busy, just so I can keep collecting my check from my company and then keep my skills up, so that eventually I kind of had a feeling I was going to get laid off, which eventually I did after 6 months. But I was occupied. Let's just put it that way. I was busy with all this other stuff during the pandemic, like many of us were. Some of us picked up new hobbies. Some of us picked up old hobbies, whatever. But I kept busy. And the DNA thing just kind of, in the chaos that was the pandemic, it just slipped out of my mind. I forgot about it. And it was more than a year later, I remembered, oh no, he took that test. I wonder if the results ever came back, because it wasn't linked to my email. It was linked to his. So I would have never gotten the update saying, hey, your DNA test came back in. So I called him and I asked, hey, did you ever get an update on this? Blah, blah. And he didn't know. He didn't remember seeing anything in his email. He never got anything in the mail. So I'm like, oh, I'll check it. So I log in, and his results did come in. And I wasn't sure if they came in, because when I looked at my DNA results, I hadn't matched with him yet. And then his came in, and they had been in for quite a few months at this point, about a year. They'd been sitting there waiting to be looked over. And I wasn't a match on his. He wasn't a match on mine. So for the first 30 seconds or so, I'm sitting there in denial thinking, oh, this has got to be a mistake. I got to reach out to them. And then I just stopped myself. I'm like, DJ, stop. You know better than this. You've done DNA before. If you're not a match, you're not a match. And that's when it hit me with like a ton of bricks that he's not my dad. It's not my dad. And I just sat there in my room. I actually have a home studio, and the silence was just deafening in that moment, because it's like everything just went silent. And all I can hear is myself repeating in my head, he's not your dad. I couldn't believe it. The man had taught me so much. We'd gone through so much, good and bad. I mean, it's the roller coaster you go through with your parents. Lessons I've learned, positive and negative. I carry his name. Everything I identified with, everything I do identify with, is around that name. And that man, that's not my father. So I kind of just went numb. And I didn't know what to say or what to do. It's like, I mean, what do you do? What do you do? It's like, okay, well, now I understand why there's no Pridemores on my ancestry DNA as matches, because he's got Pridemores. There's Pridemores I've never even heard of, and then there's a bunch of cousins I thought would have never taken an ancestry DNA. They're all there. It's all there, but it's not mine. So, yeah, now all of a sudden, I'm just falling into kind of an emotional abyss. There goes my identity, just flushed down the toilet. Who the hell am I now? Like, I mean, I know who I am as an adult. I know who I've become. I know the brand that I've created for myself. I know my work ethic. I know my morals. I have my moral fabric. I know my family. I know my daughters. I know my wife. I know my mother. I know half my story, but I only know half. What's who? You know, the age old question: who's my daddy? You know, and it's not like Dad went out for milk one day and never came back. I never had that dad to ask for milk. So I kind of sat on that for a few months, just kind of spinning my wheels in the proverbial mud about, you know, the who am I, where am I, what am I, why am I, you know, all the questions everybody asks themselves, that they're all cliche, and everybody who doesn't have these kind of experiences cannot understand them. And until that point, I didn't understand them. I have friends that were adopted from a young age, and they know names of their parents, but they don't care to know them. And it's a different perspective than an MPE, I suppose, but very similar. I mean, in a way, I guess they are MPs. And I mean, I don't know, but I never could relate to those friends that lived that story. It was very hard to relate. I would always sympathize. I couldn't empathize. I couldn't put myself in their shoes. I couldn't understand that. It's like, I grew up with a mom and a dad that I knew 100% with all the conviction in my soul that they were my mom and dad. And I was wrong. And the glass bridge that I was standing on shattered beneath my feet. And now I understood what it meant to fall. All of a sudden, I understood how my adopted friend might feel to a degree about his genetic parents to some degree. I mean, there's a whole different dynamic there that I don't know that I could relate to, but you know, I had a whole new gift box full of emotions I'd never thought were possible, never thought were conceivable for somebody like me. And then here I am swimming in it and having to learn how to swim again, because quite honestly, it was pulling me under. I was drowning in it and had no idea if anybody was there to throw a life preserver to me and help me out of this pool of despair. So I tried to talk to my wife about it, and she was understanding to a degree, and as much as she could be. She tried really hard. She listened really well, but a lot of times, you know, our spouses offer solutions to our anguish and our despair, and it's like, I'm not really looking for the solution. I'm looking for the process. Right now, I just need somebody to listen and tell me it's going to be okay, whether it is or not. And I don't say that in anger. It's just, you know, they don't understand. And I'm sure you hear this time and time again in stories. I've heard it in a few stories I've listened to, that sometimes people, whether they're our significant other, or whether they're friends or parents, they don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't lived this, and we don't understand why we feel the way we do. How could they understand, you know?
Yeah.
So I thought that I could move forward and be strong enough to, you know, talk about it. And, you know, I tried, but every time I would scratch at the wound, it just kind of tore me up. And I'm like, I got to get past this. If I'm going to get answers, I got to at least move past this point. And, you know, part of me still hasn't, to be honest. You know, you kind of learn to live with it and you cope with it, and I'm still learning. I mean, this isn't very old for me. It's only been a couple years, but I'm still learning how to process and deal with it. And again, that's where this community really, really is shedding some really good insights and light on that process and what it looks like and how it feels. I'm hearing it from people that have similar experiences paramount to, I think, the emotional healing that we all have to do in this whole journey. And the thing is, the more you search for answers, the deeper the cut gets. And that's something I didn't realize at first. It's like, okay, I'll just get answers and I'll be okay. I'll find out. I'll talk to mom. Mom will tell me what's going on. We'll figure this out. And then I'll be okay. Everything's going to be hunky dory. Well, it's not that easy. And, as I move along my story, I'm sure my story isn't as drastic as some, but, it still burrows deeper and deeper. The deeper you go in that rabbit hole, the deeper your emotions go. And you're like, oh, wow, this roller coaster is scarier than I thought it was. It's kind of like when you're a kid and you go jump on a roller coaster and you stand in line for an hour and a half in this awesome roller coaster, and it's daylight when you get in line and you're like all excited to go and everything. And then you get buckled in and strapped in, you start going up the hill and you realize it's pitch black outside and you're now going to be going on this roller coaster and not be able to see a single turn, a single loop, anything. You can't anticipate anything. You have no idea what's coming next on the track. And you come down that hill and it feels like your soul just leaves your body because now you have no control at all. You can't even anticipate it. That's kind of how I liken this emotional journey as. It's completely blind. You have no idea. You think you can see something down the road because you find an answer, and then boom, and the rug's ripped out from you again. So I do talk to mom, and I let her know, hey, dad's not my father. And she was shocked. She had no idea. And that's not always the case in these situations. And I 100% believe her that she had no idea. So it was the 70s and, she was single, and it's not like she had a ton of partners. There were only a couple names on the list that I had to go through. And it was a very, very short list and very easy to find the answer once the answer was presented to me. But, my mom was on birth control in the 70s, which wasn't as reliable then as it is now. They were always changing her, which now we also know that that's not a good thing for your cycle and for your body to be changing that medication to different hormones, et cetera, because it can cause irregularities and so on and so forth. And she was on it not so much for, she was on it for, literal hormone control because she was already kind of irregular and had some other, lady issues that was supposed to regulate. And that was her reasoning for being on it, not so much for birth control. She grew up in a very Catholic household, so that wasn't something that was accepted in her household. And it was hard for her to get onto that because of that situation and that moral background. But because it's for medical reasons, then, it was okay for that. So either way, there was a lot of situations there that were weird with that medication. And so she still had a very irregular monthly cycle. And she had no indication that she was pregnant when she became pregnant with me. And I was born in January of 78. But allegedly, when I was born, because I was 6.5 pounds, I was a tiny baby. I was long but tiny. I was underweight. My lungs weren't fully developed, and I had asthma, really bad asthma, because of the underdeveloped lungs, of course, hand in hand. So the doctor, when I was born, they took my measurements and stuff, and I'd like to meet that doctor today, honestly, because he predicted I would be no more than 5'6" and 150 pounds, blah blah blah. Joke's on you. I was also allegedly preemie. My expected birthday was going to be around St. Patrick's Day. So that's, 6 something weeks premature. And then, as an adult, after having a couple kids, I always thought that was a weird number. I'm like, I think I should have been a lot more messed up than I was. And, that cinnamon roll wasn't done cooking. It should have been a little more gooey, So that never made sense to me, but, we justify things. It's like, I'm okay now, just like the dad thing, that people were like, is that really your son? Yeah, it's the German side of me. This, you justify things to make your reality stable. So you don't have to deal with the idea that it might not be. And that was another one of those things that was just always justified and written off when I was growing up is, I was just premature. It turns out I wasn't premature. They got my expected birth date wrong because they got my conception date wrong. My mom met my dad around 4th of July weekend of 1977. So the math just doesn't math. And I didn't know that until after this DNA journey. I didn't know that till I found out that my dad wasn't my dad. I just never asked. There's never a reason for me to know when. I mean, how many of us ask our parents our conception story? That's weird, right?
Very weird. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not something I was really interested in knowing. So I didn't really want to hear the conception story of how I came into this world. It's not, hey, mom, by the way, when you're growing up, mom is mom. Mom makes you Kraft macaroni and cheese and corn dogs, and she takes you to meet your friends and have fun. Mom isn't a sexual being. Mom doesn't do those things. Mom puts Band-Aids on your boo-boos, she doesn't do those things. Mom is a saint. She's never done that before. I was immaculately conceived. Yeah, it's not something I'm talking to my mom about. But of course this conversation comes up, and then, at the time she only came up with one name, and I learned a lot about another person whom I hope we never have to speak his name again. And she only knew his first name because she tried to block him out. It was around that same time. It was actually a friend of my father's that introduced them, that my mom was dating at the time when she met my dad. And that man turned out to be a very bad man. And he just tried to force his way on her. Well, he did. And it was a very traumatic experience for my mother. And I'm like, oh no, that, and this threw me for another loop. I'm like, this cannot be my donor. This cannot be the person who brought me into this world. This is not going to be it. I am not going to have my mom look at me and have to remember this traumatic experience for the rest of our lives now because of a DNA test. This is not the story I am going to accept. No, this isn't it. And so that just drove me to, now for my mother's sake, and for mine, I don't want to be the result of that kind of interaction, and nobody does. And there's some beautiful people in this world because of that. And it's nothing against them, but it's a traumatic experience I don't want anybody to have to relive, let alone my own mother. And that's kind of what I was faced with. And I'm like, no, this can't be the answer. And I felt in my heart that was not it. I wanted it more than anything not to be it. And spoiler alert, wasn't it. So we don't have to worry about that guy ever again, because I moved forward for another 6 months and I'm toiling over this, trying to figure out how I'm going to research this guy and prove it wrong, thinking that I could be the result of this traumatic experience. And that has its own roller coaster ride that I went on that I'm glad I'm off of now. But we'll fast forward to this is actually in 1 week, this coming week is going to be 2 years that I got a message from Ancestry and from Facebook. My mom had just gotten out of open heart surgery, so she was at the Baylor Heart Hospital in Dallas, recovering. I got off work, and I was getting off work. It was about 4:45 in the afternoon, and got the messages. Hey, we're a close match, and I feel like we need to talk. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. And the person reaches out to me. So we start messaging on Facebook. They find me on Facebook. Hey, is this the same person on Ancestry? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. We start talking. At first, she thought maybe I was her uncle. And that's when I really took a kind of crash course in centimorgans, which I still don't fully understand. I mean, it's still kind of voodoo science to me, but I just don't know the math formulas to understand it. But I did find that there are ranges for certain relationships, and multiple relationships can be in And I'm sure everybody listening to this and has gone down this journey now knows that certain relationships have certain numerical values as far as centimorgans. And it could be multiple relationships, but then by the process of elimination, you decide what relationship you're in. Because it's usually pretty obvious based on generational things and, relatives in common and so forth. So we're talking and we decide it's not grandfather. And I'm like, hey, we're probably, according to centimorgans, we're likely half brother, half sister. That's the most likely match. We're a year apart. She was born in 77. I was born in 78. I'm like, let's explore that. Who is your father? And because it doesn't make sense for me to be your uncle, that it would have to be a half uncle. And those centimorgans are different than what we have. Ours aligns with, grandparent, grandchild, and I'm not, or half brother, half sibling. I'm like, we got to be half siblings. And she starts to get really excited, and we start talking about her father, and find out he's a sailor. He was in the United States Navy, and she's like, but it can't be my father. It can't be my father. He was on a boat for all of 1977. He was out at sea in 1977. I'm like, okay, well, what's his name? What boat was he on? So I find him, and I research his boat, and lo and behold, he was in the Caribbean in spring of 77, and April they dock at Norfolk for upgrades and maintenance on his ship, and everybody starts rotating off for shore leave, because when you're docked for maintenance, then you're on a smaller crew. You don't need the entire crew on the boat, so that's an opportunity for them to take shore leave. Those that are eligible go home and have a little vacation before their next tour. And they were docked in Norfolk for a few months. They were April, May, and June. They were docked, and at the end of June, early July, they set sail for the Mediterranean. First stop being Spain, and they did a goodwill tour of the Mediterranean Sea. And then they went, on from there into the South Pacific. But the gap was April, May, June. I'm like, oh my gosh. What if I wasn't premature? Because something else that we know now is that, my mom was a smoker in the 70s, and smoking is the leading cause of low birth weight and lung issues in babies. Oh no, now the maths. April, May could be it. And it turns out for the latter part of April, he was on shore leave. He was in Cleveland. I talked to my mom. I'm like, hey, did you date anybody around this time of year in 1977? She's like, oh yeah, well, that was my sailor, my one night stand. Well, she didn't call it one night stand. She's like, my blind date with my sailor. And then it all came flooding back to me. I was in a youth program with the Navy called Sea Cadets growing up, from the age of, from basically 12 years old to 17 years old. I was in Sea Cadets. And whenever I would wear my dress white uniforms and we would be on our little, we'd be at the base and doing our thing, my mom's like, oh, you remind me of my sailor. You remind me of sailor. But once again, mom didn't do that stuff. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear about your sailor. You didn't do that. You didn't have a sailor, mom. You're imagining things. So I always wrote it off. But then I'm like, holy crap. This is her sailor is likely my dad. And it's like starting to hit me now. So I'm asking her questions about her date, and she tells me where he lived, because she was driving as her best friend her boyfriend had a friend that was in town from the Navy, needed, they were going out on a double date, and they asked her to come along to be his date. And that's how that happened. It's just a, blind setup, and they had a great time, obviously. And, she ended up having to take him home, and she didn't go inside the house because mom and dad were awake when he got there, and he didn't want to deal with that, or blah, blah, blah. But she remembered exactly where she dropped him off at, and the reason she recalled it so much is because she had a brand new car, and within a month or two from that summer, the top started to rust, and she's so angry because he lived near the steel mills in Cleveland, and it was notorious getting that caustic dust on your car would cause it to rust, and she's actually still very angry about that. But that's another topic. But that's how she had such great recall. And yeah, I mean, shame on me a little bit for getting her to open up about this stuff as she's recovering from open heart surgery. But, in vino veritas, she was really drugged up and very comfortable with sharing her past. So I did take advantage a little bit of that with her relaxed state and her ability to share so openly. But she told me where he lived and that he was in the Navy, and it was about April of that year. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she's confirming everything. Go back to Becky, who was the person who contacted me. Go back to Becky and say, hey, tell me about your dad. Where did he live? Blah, blah, blah. She gives me the address he lived. It's the street my mom said that she dropped him off at. Boom, bombshell. The Navy thing, I confirmed the dates that he was in. I'm like, Becky, you're my sister. This confirms it. I showed my mom pictures. She didn't remember his face. It had been a long time. And it was like one date. What happened, and she moved on. And he didn't specifically recall her, but he is a ladies' man, and there's probably a lot of faces he doesn't remember. Let's be honest. It turns out he has 4 kids to 4 different women.
Mm.
I'm the oldest. Becky is the second, and she's elated to have a big brother now. We'd figured that out. And then I'm like, hey, Becky, there's another person that matched with me. She has a different surname than both of us. So did you match with her? She's like, oh my God, I did match with her. And the Centimorgans are very similar. I'm like, they're within a few Centimorgans of our Matt. She's probably our half sister as well. Does your dad know of another one? He didn't. So she reaches out to her. I'm like, you reach out to her? Because I reached out to her years ago, but I didn't know what I know now. So it would have yielded nothing at that time because we had no link. There was that missing piece wasn't there to figure out the puzzle. Turns out she calls her, and Brianna is the other person, and she was born in 91, much younger than us. But turns out she was open to it. And, a female reaching out to you is much, if you're female, I know that dynamically speaking, it's much less intimidating to get a random female reaching out to you than some random dude that you've never heard of, especially on Facebook. Because, I get it. I'm a girl dad. I know that there's creepers out there, and that's probably why she never responded to me. I'm like, so I tell Becky, hey, you reach out to her, much easier for coming from a female, and maybe we can open this up and figure this out. Turns out she talks to her mom. Her mom breaks down in tears immediately and tells her, yeah, I was hoping this day would never come. And then it's the story you hear over and over again of like, yeah, I've always known and suspected it was this guy and never wanted to tell you because I wanted this to be your dad. So we just told you this was your dad. And so she grew up with a dad that in much the same way I did, except that her mom knew. And, she's got an interesting story too. It's had its ups and downs. Her dad did not receive it well. He's okay now, but he had a lot of trouble accepting it, unfortunately. And it has a happier ending because they're fine now and they're back to terms. He still loves her, still his daughter, and he's still her dad. Ultimately, it has a happy ending that not everybody gets, but it did not start easy for her. For me, it was a lot easier. When I told my dad, he laughed about it because for that whole "is that your son" thing, and he always had his doubts for different reasons. So it was sort of double-ended. Like I got to shut down the idea that mom. He always suspected she had cheated on him because he was like, how is she this pregnant? Blah blah blah. Yeah, he always questioned the pregnancy so quick when they got together, and turns out she was just already pregnant when they met. He just didn't know it, and neither did she. I was already there. They just didn't know. And my genetic father never knew. She never heard from him again, and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's crazy. Since then, and by the way, that house that she dropped him off from, just for the audience's pleasure, is 2 blocks away from the house that they filmed A Christmas Story. So I've always been drawn to that movie too. And I'm like, oh, I feel like I lived in that neighborhood. It's like I didn't live there properly, but my dad did. My dad
Yep.
lived right down the street from that house. It's crazy. And I've been in that house as an adult and visited, been in the neighborhood, driven right by where his house was. It's raised now, but right where he lived, I've been down that street and didn't have any idea. It's crazy. Like I've crossed lines with him so many times and didn't know it. We do talk now about every 2 weeks. Well, not even every 2 weeks. Every week we talk, honestly. I just spoke with him yesterday. And I'm in Dallas. My oldest sister is in South Carolina. My baby sister is in North Carolina. I have a brother, which I haven't connected with yet because that puzzle piece has not been put in place yet. There's some familial issues with that brother. He doesn't want a relationship with our father, our genetic father, and has turned his back on him and anything to do with him, including Becky. She's reached out a couple of times and has spoken to him once, but there's a lot of reluctance there. And I get it. There's a lot of reason for that. And I'll be patient. I'm not going to rush anybody to do this. My heart is full right now with the two sisters that I've gained, and we're learning about each other every day and walking this path together. And it's so amazing to have siblings that I didn't have growing up, and that's a whole nother can of worms too. As grateful as I am to have them in my life now, it's like, what would have been like if we'd have known about each other? You kind of mourn the childhood you never had when you go through this. And that's a whole nother thing. But for me, it's a happier ending than most. So I can process that grief process a little differently because I do have like a happy tie to it. The other part of the story, and I'll hit this really quick, probably should have spent more time on this than the rest of it because everybody usually wants to hear more about this part of it. But Dad is overjoyed to have his new children in his life and his new grandchildren. He has communicated with my daughters and his heart is so full that to have all these new relationships and to have this new family. And I'm glad to bring that joy to him because unfortunately, Dad is incarcerated. And Dad is an individual on condemned row in Arizona.
Oh, has he been incarcerated this whole time?
He got arrested on my 14th birthday. How poetic is that in a sad way? Didn't even know he had a son, and he gets arrested on my 14th birthday, 1992, for a murder he claims innocence to, that he was convicted on largely circumstantial evidence. I'm reading a lot about the case every day, and there's no smoking gun, so to speak, literally, that ties him directly to the murder. It's all circumstantial evidence, and it does not look good for him. There's some subterfuge involved with other people in the story. His girlfriend at the time he lied to about why he was going to Phoenix and lied to about where he got a vehicle from. And there's tons of things that make him look like a very bad person, but they're also just things that are kind of circumstantial that, he couldn't help. So, it is what it is. He got convicted on those basis and he was convicted. He was sentenced to death. He doesn't have a date, but he is on death row. And there was some also conjecture about his jury having mistrial and so forth. And the lead jury foreman petitioned the judge, but then that was written off by the DA and her, who found 3 other jurors to write an affidavit contradicting her claims. And she tried to get the information into the hands of his attorney and him, but it came too late because just the timeline that you have to do that in Arizona elapsed by the time he got the information. She maintained contact with him. And now, fast forward to current times, he's married to the jury foreman that convicted him of this murder.
Oh, wow.
A crazy story. Crazy story.
And you're able to talk to him, even though he's on death row. You have like an email, snail mail, or phone calls?
Email and phone calls. I'm on his visitation list, so I get 15 minutes to talk to him.
Okay.
at a time, and he gets a certain number of phone calls a day. So sometimes we'll talk for half an hour because he'll call me and then not be done, and we'll talk for 15 more minutes. The call will end and he'll call me back. We have texts and email messages I can send back and forth. And of course, they're all screened and they go through the, systems screening process, but we can snail mail stuff to a degree. Now that's being scanned. So then it goes to they have a little tablet that they have all their technology on. And so, yeah, we do communicate quite regularly, and I'm developing a positive relationship with him, despite the circumstances. He's my father when it comes down to it. He's my genetic father, and there's a story there. His story for the past 35 years has not been pleasant. 36 years, is it? Either way, it's not 34 years. It's not a pleasant story for that period of time, but it's still a story. And the way I look at it is like, he's my father. He's in the situation he's in, and that has nothing really to do with me directly. I'm now a part of that story, but what led him there has nothing to do with me. His decisions and his actions had nothing to do with me. Whether he's innocent or guilty has nothing to do with me. What does have to do with me are genetics and his story as a human being and where he was in 77, and, the person he is deep down inside, even with the potential of this, terrible crime, which he claims innocence and claims, again, there's nothing concrete. There is conjecture there. So I'm open-minded about it, but I'm also fully aware he was convicted. But he's still my father, and I still want to know who he is. And deep down, beyond the court case and beyond his circumstances, I want to know who he is and who he was. And that helps answer a lot of questions about who I am.
Yeah, of course. It's still your father, your biological father.
And it gives me a crap ton of street cred because my dad's on death row. Don't mess with me, man.
Right.
Just kidding.
You are not my first guest to have a father. I don't know Brad's story from maybe second season. Brad Ewell, his dad was in prison on life without parole, and I'll talk with you more about this off the record. But he ended up getting his dad out. So this is not the first time I've heard this story, and unfortunately I feel like we could have a part 2, but I do have another interview here this afternoon. So at this point, I did want to ask you, are you open to people contacting you if they want to hear more about your story or if they want to get in touch with you directly?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to reach out to me in that context is either I would direct people to go to Facebook or Instagram, and either one of those you do the /Radio DJ the DJ, just the way it sounds. Radio DJ the DJ. It's the easiest way to find me. And the Facebook page will take you to me. It's, Don Pridemore Jr. But it's facebook.com/Radio DJ the DJ or Instagram.com/Radio DJ the DJ. And if people want to hear more, I'll be happy to share. And I may do another podcast. I've been encouraged to do a podcast of my own on this, but I'm like, there's so many avenues that already exist for this, and I felt like I could touch more of the community by being on what is my favorite NPE podcast that I've listened to, which is yours.
That's so sweet. But I would encourage you, if you have an idea for another side content, please, because I loved listening to you today and your voice and just the way you describe everything. DJ, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate you sharing your story.
And thank you for letting me share. When I can share with people that understand, the emotions behind the stories, it's very cathartic, and it helps me as much as it might help somebody else out there. So thank you for listening, and thank you for everybody who listens to this. It helps us all.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.